Sierra Leone has declared a nationwide curfew after an unidentified gunman attacked a military barracks and attempted to break into an armory in the capital, Freetown. The government said in a statement that the security forces were in control of the situation. The statement advised citizens to stay indoors and adding that government and state security forces are in control. The political situation in the West African nation has remained tense since the re-election of President Julius Maada Bio in a disputed election in June, the result of which was rejected by the main opposition candidate. The president had said at the time that anti-government protests that resulted in the death of 6 police officers and 21 civilians last August were an attempt to overthrow the government. Meanwhile, West Africa's regional bloc, the Economic Community of West African States, has condemned the attempt by certain individuals to acquire arms and disturb the constitutional order in the country. And in the Middle East, prison authorities in Israel announced early on Sunday that they had released 39 Palestinians after Hamas freed 13 Israeli hostages, as well as 4 Thai nationals in the latest stage of a 4-day ceasefire. Television footage showed hostages on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing after leaving Gaza, as Hamas handed over the captives to the International Committee of the Red Cross late on Saturday. Of the 13 Israelis released, 6 were women and 7 were children and teenagers. The release was delayed by several hours after Hamas accused Israel of breaching its part of the 4-day truce agreement, an accusation Israel denied. The former hostages have been accompanied by special forces and will undergo initial medical assessments and will then be reunited with their families. Ambassador Joe Keshi is a former permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He joins us now to offer some perspective on these developments. Good to have you on This Day Live, Ambassador Joe Keshi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and happy Sunday.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you, Ambassador Keshi. Let's start with Sierra Leone. Now, democracy in West Africa, in Africa, indeed. A few days ago, President Olusegun Obasanjo had a retreat in Abeokuta attended by scholars, politicians from across African states, and the major issue was rethinking Western liberal democracy. And at that forum, President Obasanjo was saying that, look, it looks like this Western liberal democracy is not working because Africans were not at the table when it was designed. They were not part of the definition of the contest. And that the reason we have issues in Africa is because of the misapplication of Western liberal democracy, which appears to be alien. And he thinks Africans should look inwards and come up with what he calls Afro-democracy. Now, less than 48 hours after, we had this situation again in Sierra Leone, arising from the elections held in June, as if to confirm President Obasanjo's, suspicion about democracy in Africa. Is there the possibility of something called Afro-democracy? And what do you think is the main issue in Sierra Leone, where prisoners have been freed and a curfew has been declared today?
Well, Ruben, this is not the first time you've heard such arguments. Recall that in the 60s and the 70s, when you had more forceful opponents of Western democracy, they made all kinds of arguments for us to look internally and develop what they call African democracy and things like that. Now, whether it's Western or Eastern, Southern or whatever, democracy has some basic characteristics. It has nothing to do with one part of the world or the other. It simply has to do with the inability of some operators around the world to live by the tenets of democracy. Election, for example, democracy is not all about elections, but is the failure of the electoral process in a number of African countries that lead to such situations as you are seeing in Sierra Leone and elsewhere. And it boils down to the issue of leadership. You just finished a conversation with a member of the House on electoral reforms. And I met the gentleman while coming into the studio, and I told him, I said, look, I have no confidence in what you guys want to do, except you politicians change. And that is the honest truth. Since 1999, INEC has been responsible for the failures of our electoral process. Nobody has reprimanded INEC. Nobody has cautioned INEC. Instead, we seem to be glorifying, praising INEC, giving INEC more powers and things like that. The leaders themselves who are responsible for the crisis begin to offer congratulations to some of them. And you think that when we come up with African or Afro-democracy, by the way, what does it mean? Democracy is the same everywhere in the world. It has the same characteristics. But if our leaders and politicians refuse to play by the rules and by the tenets of democracy, whether you call it Afro-democracy or democracy based on whatever you call it, it's still going to be the same until we in this country, for example, or Africa, until we have a change of mind that we really want to make this whole system work. If it's working elsewhere where they did not invent it, why is it not working in this part of the world? And I think that's the question we should be debating. But whether you call it Afro, African, or whatever it is, it doesn't really make sense because democracy in itself, by its definition, has the same characteristics.
Well, about 8 African countries in West and Central Africa are today under military occupation, if we can use that expression, including Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Gabon. And that would seem to be a clear indication of democracy failing in Africa. We used to talk about democratic consolidation, but I don't think Africa can talk about democratic consolidation again. Do you put all this down to the failure of leadership in the affected countries?
Oh, look, of course, if you take Gabon, for example, you know, elections were announced, the results of elections were announced even before the final collation was made because the leader then, Bongo, just wanted to retain himself in office. There were complaints about what happened in Sierra Leone. Just there were a whole lot of complaints of what happened in Nigeria. In Mali and elsewhere, of course, again, you can call it the failure of leadership because the military complained that the leaders who sent them to the war front were not providing them the means to execute the war. So you can begin to see that it's not really the whole concept of democracy itself, but certain failures here and there of the system. If we can get some of these things right, and I keep making that, I heard the gentleman talking of what they are going to do. They can change the rules. They can reform the system. But if the operators of the system refuse to to play by the rules of the game, you don't blame the concept. You should blame the leaders who are expected to ensure, institutionalize, entrench, and make sure that the system works first. And this has to do with the whole, whether in Nigeria or anywhere else, it starts with the government, the leaders of government. It starts with the judiciary. It starts with the institutions. Everybody has a role to ensure that these things work. But where we don't want it to work, Ruben, there's nothing you can do. You know, I'm sure you don't have time. I would have told you the story of myself and taxi drivers in Abuja recently. It just shows you where police have given up hope that they can control taxi drivers. They have this defeatist attitude that taxi drivers do not obey any rules, and the police have just given up. So that shows you the mindset. Are you going to blame that on the failure of democracy? No. The failure of the police authorities to make sure that the laws governing driving is obeyed. But they have given up. Taxi drivers, we are tired of them. So when you come up with that defeatist attitude, do you blame that on the failure of democracy or the failure of the institution empowered to enforce the law, refusing to enforce the law?
Well, Ambassador, let's talk about the Middle East. The last time you were on this program, we were talking about the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And in the last 2 days, Saturday and today, there have been developments. 39 Palestinians have been released. 13 Israelis have been released, including women and teenagers. And there's a 4-day ceasefire that has been declared. Do you think that the world should be optimistic about the cessation of hostilities between Israel and the Qassam Brigade in Gaza?
You know, Ruben, it depends on how the world utilizes this 4 days truce to ensure that they begin to search for lasting peace in the Middle East, but particularly between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I see a tremendous amount of opportunity, particularly if all the leaders in that region and the Americans, the Western world, decide that, look, this is an opportunity. They must begin to press both sides to make lasting peace. I honestly hope that, one, the leaders of the Arab world will see a sense in which they can press Hamas, you know, bring Hamas to a negotiating table and convince Hamas that the time has come to make peace, you know, with Israel. I hope that the Western world itself can begin to press Israel to say, look, since you were created, generations after generations have been fighting war. Must the next set of generations continue to fight war? The opportunity to make peace is there, that if Hamas keeps to the terms of the agreement and continue to release hostages, and the Israelis also meet up and do not attempt to, you know, resume or, you know, make the whole thing fail, I think that the opportunity is there to make peace. But all will depend on the roles the Arab leaders are ready to play and the roles the Western leaders are ready to play to push both sides to the negotiating table. And talking of negotiating table, it's time that the Western world itself see the sense in bringing Iran into the equation. A couple of years ago, who would have thought that Iran would be so powerful to be providing arms and ammunition or drones to Russia? But today they are growing in strength as a result of what they're experiencing, just like the Israelis grew in strength as a result of the insecurity around them. So the Arab leaders must come together and begin to press for a negotiated settlement, as well as the Western leaders should also see an opportunity in this, not only to prolong the ceasefire, but to press on both sides to make genuine peace. And as of now, there's only one solution on the table. If anybody has a better idea, let's have it. But now, two-state solution probably is the best option that we have on the table. But if they fail to do this, if they fail to press both sides and they allow hostility to resume again, look, I really don't think that it will be helpful. But there is the opportunity now, extend the ceasefire and begin to make peace.
Well, in Nigeria, recently, we had reports of members of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, IMN, staging protests, you know, in solidarity with Hamas in parts of the country, and many of the members were arrested. Do you think that this is really about religion, that other people should get involved in, or, you know, it's more than religion? Because it was alarming to see that something is happening in the Middle East and Nigeria was going to become a theater of conflict because of a Middle East crisis. What will you say to those Nigerians who are weeping more than they believed in this matter? Look,
this is absolutely not about religion. And I sincerely hope the leaders of the various sects of those who are protesting could enlighten their people. It is certainly more than, religion. The sooner we realize that in this country, instead, again, I go back to what I said, I think our leaders need to educate the people that this is not about religion, that it's a conflict that has nothing to do really with religion from day one, except that it's all about land, who owns the land, either from Abraham time or, and that sort of thing. But the most important thing for us in this country is to realize that it has little to do with religion. Yes, it has some religious connotations because everybody quotes, there's a dispute about who owns the land. I don't think we should get into that where we are today. The truth of the matter is that these guys have had, look, since 1940-something, 45 or thereabout, they've been fighting wars. A time comes in which a leaders on both sides needs to say to themselves, enough is enough. And for us in this country and the rest of African country, demonstrating in terms of religion is not the solution. What we should be urging our leaders to do to be part of the process, to be encouraging both sides to the negotiating table and to find a peaceful solution, to the crisis. It is possible and the opportunity is there because by the current agreement, tomorrow is the last day for the truce. Now, if Hamas decide to release more people on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the truce will be extended. And the more it's extended, the better chance for peace and for negotiation, irrespective of some of the angers. I've seen on a number of international networks some Israeli ex-ambassadors and military chiefs, sounding, very warlike, and that's, no. We should, I think, ignore those people. Focus on the fact that this is an opportunity for peace, irrespective of what has happened. Yes, what Hamas did was wrong, but Ruben, look, there are these reports that nobody is focusing on. Thousands of young Palestinian kids were incarcerated, put in prison for as little as throwing stones. They've been in prison for 10 years. In fact, one can conclude when you hear the stories emerging from these correctional centers, it has become a breeding ground for future Hamas operatives. Because a child who was taken at 10 and put into prison 6 years later is 16 years old, which was exactly what we found in Sierra Leone. Some people started fighting at 7, and by the time the war ended, they were 17 years old. So we need to honestly begin to talk to these people seriously that, look, this tit for tat, this question of destroying one another, look, the Israelis set out to destroy Hamas. But they are negotiating with Hamas. They are talking to Hamas, even if they are talking through parties. So let's face the reality. The people of Palestine, Gaza, they have suffered enough. The Israelis too have also been seriously injured and destabilized. Let's find a common ground where both parties can live together under a two-state solution.
Well, on that note, Ambassador Joe Keshi, I would like to thank you very much for joining us on This is Live, the Sunday talk show, looking at the situation in Sierra Leone, which we understand is now under control, and the latest developments in the Middle East, and the prospects for a ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Thank you very much, Ambassador Keshi, for joining us.